So I want you to imagine something for a second. If you were to take a perfectly healthy silverback gorilla, right?
Okay, gorilla. I'm with you.
Right. So you take this gorilla, you remove it from the jungle, and you strap these thick rubber blocks onto the bottom of its feet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and then you pull it completely out of the sun and you trap it inside this 72-degree artificially lit climate controlled box for like 22 hours a day.
That is, well, that's a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. I mean, it would develop profound metabolic and psychological illness in a matter of weeks, right?
Yeah.
The zoologist would be in an absolute panic.
Well, they'd be scrambling to figure out what disease it caught.
Right. But the crazy thing is, humans subject themselves to this exact same environmental mismatch every single day. And then, we sit around wondering why our baseline state of being feels so compromised.
We really do. We treat all the resulting fatigue, the systemic inflammation, the brain fog. We treat all of that as if they're spontaneous diseases.
Right, like we just caught a case of the brain fog.
Exactly. Rather than seeing them as the completely logical biological consequences of, well, removing an organism from its natural habitat. I mean, we've built this incredibly comfortable modern world, but that comfort has essentially insulated us from the raw environmental inputs our biology actually requires to function.
It's so ironic, too, because to fix the problems created by our modern environment, we usually just turn to, well, even more modern inventions.
Oh, absolutely. The wellness industry essentially commodifies human biology.
Yeah, they do. We are totally conditioned to believe that optimization requires complexity. Like, we buy the heavy metal detox supplements or we download those intricate sleep architecture tracking apps.
And we strap microcomputers to our wrists.
Yes, we're always looking to some biohacking guru to sell us the ultimate shortcut.
And what's fascinating here is that it creates a wellness landscape defined almost entirely by information overload.
Hmm.
I mean, you are constantly being marketed solutions to biological inefficiencies that you didn't even know you possessed.
Right. It's like, oh, I didn't know I needed to fix that, but here's a pill for it.
Exactly. The assumption is always that you need to add something synthetic to your routine to achieve high performance.
And that is the exact paradigm we are dismantling in today's deep dive. We are stripping all of that complex, expensive noise completely away.
I love that.
Yeah, so we are analyzing a framework of foundational science-backed protocols that were recently synthesized from the insights of Gary Brecka. The mission of this deep dive is to uncover how to radically upregulate your health, your cognitive focus, your hormonal balance, and your longevity. And we're doing it using exclusively the mechanical systems already built into your physiology.
Which is the best part.
It is, because the most subversive part of this entire framework is the cost. Like every single intervention we are about to decode for you costs absolutely nothing. $0.
And that's what people need to hear.
Mm.
Because high performance isn't a destination you arrive at by swiping a credit card, or by acquiring more data. The human body is arguably the most sophisticated adaptive machine in the universe, and we actually possess the ability to manually adjust its levers. But you have to know which levers to pull.
So true. You don't need more inputs, you just need less, but much better inputs. So to understand how to really recalibrate the human animal, I think we have to start with the very first environmental signal the brain receives, right? To orchestrate its daily rhythm.
Absolutely, the light environment.
Yes, the biological light switch. We are talking about immediate, unfiltered morning sunlight exposure. The protocol here dictates exposing your retinas and your skin to natural sunlight for, say, 10 to 20 minutes, ideally within the first 30 to 60 minutes of waking.
And we should emphasize that the non-negotiable parameter here is that there can be no sunglasses.
Yep.
And no looking through a glass window.
Okay, let's unpack this because the window thing always trips people up. Why can't I just drink my coffee looking out the kitchen window?
Because that window caveat is exactly where people fail the protocol. Standard window glass actually filters out the specific ultraviolet and blue light wavelengths that are required to trigger these biological mechanisms.
Oh, wow. So it looks bright to us, but the actual beneficial wavelengths are blocked.
Exactly. When unfiltered, full-spectrum sunlight hits the eye, it isn't just, facilitating vision. It's communicating directly with a very specific subset of cells in the retina called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, or iPRGCs for short.
iPRGCs. Okay. And these aren't the rods and cones we learned about in grade school, right? The ones that process images and colors.
No, completely different. These cells contain a photopigment called melanopsin, And that pigment is highly, highly sensitive to the blue light spectrum that's just naturally abundant in morning sunlight.
So what happens when the sunlight hits that melanopsin?
Well, when the melanopsin in those ganglion cells absorbs those morning photons, an electrical signal actually travels directly down this pathway. The retinohypothalamic tracks straight to the suprachiasmatic nucleus.
The SCN.
Yes, the SCN, which is essentially the master clock of the brain. It sits right above the optic chiasm.
Okay, so the light hits the eye, travels to this master clock in the brain. Then what?
When the SCN receives that signal, it initiates this massive systemic hormonal cascade. First, it actively halts the production of melatonin by the pineal gland.
Right, melatonin. And people in the optimization space, we are super familiar with melatonin, but we usually only think of it in the context of taking a supplement at night to go to sleep.
Which is a huge oversight.
Yeah. We forget that clearing residual melatonin out of your system in the morning is just as critical as producing it in the evening. Like if you wake up and the first thing you do is look at your phone screen or flip on overhead LED lights.
The lux intensity just isn't there.
Exactly. The sheer brightness of that artificial light isn't high enough to effectively clear that melatonin, so you end up in this state of sleep inertia.
You're literally walking around for hours with a neurochemical profile that is still partially signaling your brain to sleep.
Which explains why people feel so groggy until noon if they stay indoors.
Oh, precisely. And simultaneous to that melatonin clearance, that same light signal to the SCN triggers the release of cortisol.
Okay, wait. I want to pause on cortisol for a second because the narrative around cortisol is wildly polarized online.
Oh, it really is.
Yeah, the conventional wisdom is basically just, cortisol equals stress, stress equals bad, so lower your cortisol at all costs.
Which is a fundamental misunderstanding of endocrinology.
Right.
I mean, yes, chronic elevated cortisol at 8 o'clock at night, that is disastrous for your sleep architecture and cellular repair.
Right.
But an acute, robust spike in cortisol first thing in the morning, that is the biological definition of alertness. It's actually known as the cortisol awakening response, or CRR.
The CR, I've heard of that. What does a healthy CR actually look like?
A healthy CAR involves about a 50% increase in cortisol levels within 30 to 45 minutes of waking up. And that spike, it's vital. It increases your blood pressure slightly, it raises your core body temperature, and it mobilizes glucose for energy. It is quite literally the natural physiological engine of daytime focus.
And the source material specifically references research published in the Frontiers of Neuroscience that illustrates this. This precise early light exposure does way more than just wake you up.
Oh, absolutely.
It dramatically improves your baseline mood, it increases daytime cognitive alertness, and it has a profound inverse relationship with insomnia. Like the light you absorb at 7 a.m. directly dictates the amplitude of the melatonin pulse your pineal gland is going to release at 11 p.m.
Yep.
Because you are anchoring your entire circadian rhythm. If you miss this initial light input, you are basically allowing your master clock to drift.
It's like a watch losing time. Exactly. And every downstream biological process, from your core temperature minimum to your digestive enzyme secretion, it all becomes misaligned. You are essentially starting the metabolic race out of phase with your own environment.
That is so crazy to think about. And beyond the neuroophthalmic pathways, the eye stuff, there's also the dermal exposure, sunlight hitting the skin, because that initiates the synthesis of vitamin D.
Right. And to be biologically accurate here, vitamin D isn't actually a vitamin at all.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's actually a sequestroid hormone. The UVB radiation from the sun reacts with this cholesterol derivative in your skin called 7-dehydrocholesterol, and it converts it into cholecalciferol.
Okay, big words, but basically the skin makes a precursor.
Right, which the liver and kidneys then metabolize into the active hormone. And that active hormone binds to receptors in virtually every tissue in the human body. It modulates immune system function, bone metabolism, and even the synthesis of serotonin in the brain.
So the systemic return on investment for simply standing outside for 10 minutes is just staggering.
It's unmatched.
Okay, but I need to push back on the practicality of this for a minute.
Sure, go ahead.
Because the data is super clear for optimal conditions. But what about the environmental reality for a lot of people? Like, what if someone lives in the Pacific Northwest? Or it's the dead of winter in London, and the sky is just this thick gray blanket of clouds. Does the physics of this still work if the sky visibly looks dark to the human eye?
It's a vital question. And it really comes down to understanding how light is actually measured versus how our eyes perceive it subjectively.
Okay, explain that.
Well, our pupils dilate in overcast conditions, which makes us think the environment is way darker than it chemically is. We measure light intensity in units called lux. Now, a standard indoor, brightly lit office environment might sit around, say, 400 to 500 lux.
Okay, 4 to 500 inside.
Right. But a completely overcast, gloomy winter day outside, that still provides anywhere from 2,000 to 10,000 lux.
Wait, seriously. So even on a terrible, gloomy day, the ambient outdoor light is exponentially stronger than your bright indoor office lighting.
Yes, exactly. The photons are simply scattered by the cloud cover rather than coming down in a direct focused beam. But the intensity required to trigger those melanopsin receptors in the retina, which only requires roughly 1,000 to 3,000 lux for an extended duration, is still easily achieved on a cloudy day.
Wow.
You might need to stay outside for 20 minutes instead of 10 just to get the total photon count up, but the biological light switch definitely still flips.
That completely reframes the morning for me. Instead of waking up in a dark room and stumbling into the artificial lux of a kitchen, staring at a smartphone, you just step outside. You don't stare at the sun, obviously. You just expose your eyes to the ambient sky.
Right, don't dare the sun.
Yeah, safety first. But you are physically setting the master clock. Now, light sets the systemic clock from the outside, right? Which governs the macro rhythm of the whole day. But what about the immediate second-to-second regulation of the nervous system? Because once the clock is running, we need a way to modulate the intensity of the machine.
And to do that, you need an internal mechanical lever.
Which transitions us perfectly to the respiratory system, specifically conscious breathwork. So grabbing the ultimate remote control for your body. The source outlines protocols requiring just 5 to 10 minutes of controlled breathing.
Which is practically nothing in the grand scheme of a day.
Right. And the foundational method they discuss is box breathing. So that's a 4-second inhale, a 4-second breath retention, a 4-second exhale, and a 4-second suspension at the bottom of the breath before you inhale again.
Exactly. Or, alternatively, there's a protocol of taking 30 deep, deliberate diaphragmatic breaths, drawing the air in through the nose and expelling it through the mouth, really utilizing those secondary muscles of respiration.
And the physiological uniqueness of the breath just cannot be overstated. If you look at the autonomic nervous system, which is the background operating system controlling your digestion, your kidney filtration, your cardiovascular output, you have absolutely zero direct somatic control over any of that.
Right.
Like, I cannot just sit here and consciously command my liver to upregulate its enzymatic activity. It's impossible.
No, you can't. And what's fascinating here is that the respiratory system is the singular anomaly in human biology in that regard. It is governed autonomously by the brainstem so that you don't, suffocate in your sleep.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. But at any given second, your cerebral cortex can intervene and just take manual control of the diaphragm and intercostal muscles.
I always think of it like the manual override switch in an airplane cockpit. When the autonomic autopilot encounters turbulence, say you get an unexpected stressful email or you're stuck in awful traffic, it defaults to a sympathetic nervous system response.
Fight or flight.
Exactly. The alarms blare, your heart rate spikes, adrenaline floods the system, and the plane starts to nosedive into a panic. Conscious breathwork is the literal act of reaching out, grabbing the yoke, and physically leveling the aircraft.
I love that analogy. And to understand how that yoke actually connects to the plane's flaps, biologically speaking, we have to look at the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve.
Okay, the vagus nerve. Break that down for us.
It is the primary superhighway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest pathway. The vagus nerve literally wanders from the brainstem down through the chest and into the abdomen, directly innervating the heart, the lungs, and the digestive tract.
So when you engage in that deliberate box breathing, if you're listening right now, actually just trace a square in the air while we talk about this. It makes it super concrete. So you're doing this 4-4-4-4 breathing, particularly focusing on the slow, extended exhale and those breath holds. What is mechanically happening to that vagus nerve?
Well, it comes down to a mechanism called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, which sounds complicated, but is really elegant. When you inhale, your diaphragm contracts and moves downward, right, which expands the space in your thoracic cavity.
Okay, so the chest cavity gets bigger.
Exactly. This expansion actually decreases the pressure around your heart, so blood flows more rapidly into the heart, and to maintain efficient cardiac output, your brain signals the sympathetic nervous system to slightly speed up your heart rate.
Oh, wait, so the inhale is naturally slightly stimulating.
Yes, it is. But the magic happens on the exhale. When you exhale slowly for those 4 seconds, the diaphragm relaxes and moves back upward. The space in the thoracic cavity decreases, the pressure increases, and blood flow into the heart naturally slows down.
Okay. Making sense.
In response to that, the baroreceptors, which are these tiny pressure sensors in your blood vessels, they detect this change and send a signal shooting straight up the vagus nerve.
And what does the vagus nerve do with that signal?
The vagus nerve responds by releasing a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine directly onto the sinoatrial node of the heart, which physically acts as a brake. It slows your heart rate down.
That is incredible. So that dynamic interplay between the inhale speeding the heart up and the exhale slowing it down, that is what dictates heart rate variability, or HRV.
Exactly. It's the variation in time between each heartbeat. And the source leans heavily on some really rigorous research from Harvard Medical School and Stanford, demonstrating that these conscious breathing protocols drastically improve HRV.
And high HRV is a good thing, right?
A very good thing. High HRV means your heart is highly responsive to the immediate demands of the environment. It indicates strong vagal tone, meaning you are capable of shifting instantly from a state of high arousal and stress back to a state of profound calm.
It essentially builds a resilient autonomic nervous system.
Yes.
And the data shows this practice lowers circulating cortisol, it dampens systemic anxiety, and it even increases the efficiency of oxygen offloading in the tissues, right?
Right, which ties right into the Bohr effect, where elevated CO2 tolerance, which you get from those breath holds during box breathing, actually allows hemoglobin to release oxygen more readily to your brain cells.
So you're literally getting more oxygen into the cells where it matters. It fundamentally upgrades emotional control and executive functioning in the prefrontal cortex.
It really does.
Yet, because conscious breathing requires no specialized equipment, and again, costs absolutely nothing, human psychology tends to just deeply undervalue it. Like, if a pharmaceutical company engineered a compound that instantly increased vagal tone, lowered cortisol, and improved decision-making without any side effects, it would be considered a medical miracle.
People would pay thousands of dollars for it.
Exactly. We possess the biological machinery to do it natively, yet we ignore it simply because it's free.
Human nature is funny that way. If we don't pay for it, we assume it has no value.
So true. Okay, so we've calibrated the master clock with photons from the sun, and we've overridden the autonomic nervous system using the mechanical lever of the diaphragm with breathwork. But there's another fundamental boundary between human biology and the natural environment that we have totally artificially severed. We've completely insulated ourselves electrically.
Yes. This brings us to the science of grounding, or earthing.
Right. And the protocol here is exceptionally straightforward. 10 minutes of placing bare skin, typically the soles of your feet, in direct contact with a natural conductive surface, like soil, grass, or sand.
Just 10 minutes.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because I am going to push back aggressively on this.
I figured you might.
Yeah, because grounding carries a massive amount of stigma. For an audience that is highly attuned to rigorous biooptimization, the idea of taking your shoes off and standing in the dirt just sounds like, I don't know, pseudoscientific mysticism, like total woo-woo.
It definitely sounds that way at first glance.
Right. Some people hear this and just roll their eyes. The source text mentions the Earth emitting a, quote, low G current. Let's break down the actual physics of this. If I'm standing on the soil, how on earth does an electrical current from the dirt get through the dense layer of dead skin cells, the stratum corneum on the bottom of my feet? Is the Earth's charge genuinely powerful enough to create a physiological change inside my bloodstream?
It is a totally valid skepticism, but the physics are actually well documented. To understand it, we really have to zoom out and look at the Earth itself as an electrical entity.
Okay, zoom out how far?
Just to the atmosphere. The surface of the Earth is electrically conductive, and it maintains a constant negative potential. This is maintained by the global atmospheric electrical circuit, which is primarily fed by thousands of lightning strikes happening globally at any given moment.
Wait, lightning strikes are charging the ground?
Basically, yes. The Earth's surface is essentially an infinite reservoir of free electrons.
Okay, and how does that connect to us?
Well, the human body is a dynamic electrical circuit. Our nervous system, our heartbeats, our muscular contractions, these are all governed by cellular voltage and ion channels.
We're basically walking batteries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the human body is highly conductive because we are primarily composed of water and minerals. Now, regarding your question about the dead skin cells on the feet, the stratum corneum.
Right, because that seems like an insulator.
It would be, except for one thing, sweat. Even microscopic amounts of moisture, combined with the incredibly high density of sweat glands on the soles of your feet, create continuous conductive channels right through that layer of dead skin.
Oh, wow. So the sweat acts as a conduit.
Exactly. So when you take off a rubber-soled shoe, and remember, rubber is a synthetic polymer specifically designed to stop electrical currents.
Right. Electricians wear rubber boots for a reason.
Exactly. When you remove that insulator and place your conductive foot on the conductive earth, your body's electrical potential instantly equalizes with the Earth's potential.
The electrons flow up into the body. But why does biological optimization require an influx of free electrons? Like, what are those electrons actually doing once they're inside?
That requires a quick dive into redox biology and oxidative stress. So as our mitochondria produce cellular energy ATP, they generate metabolic exhaust. It's just a byproduct of the engine running.
Like exhaust from a car.
Precisely. And a significant portion of this exhaust takes the form of reactive oxygen species or free radicals.
Let's look at the atomic structure of a free radical, because this is where the electron thing makes sense. It is a molecule that has an unpaired electron in its outermost valence shell.
Right.
And atoms inherently seek stability, which requires paired electrons. Because a free radical is missing an electron, it is highly unstable and extremely reactive. It essentially acts like a molecular thief, right?
That's a perfect way to describe it. It will crash into healthy cellular structures like the lipid membrane of a cell or even your DNA and physically rip an electron away just to stabilize itself.
And that process of stealing electrons is called oxidation.
Yes. And when it damages the cell membrane, it's called lipid peroxidation. Now, this damage triggers the immune system to respond, which creates inflammation. Chronic systemic inflammation is the underlying driver of nearly every modern metabolic disease we face, from atherosclerosis to neurodegeneration.
So normally we combat this by consuming antioxidants, right? Like eating blueberries or taking vitamin C or glutathione, because those are molecules that can donate an electron to a free radical without becoming unstable themselves.
Exactly. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Earth itself is actually the largest antioxidant on the planet.
Whoa.
When you ground yourself, that limitless supply of free electrons from the Earth's surface flows into your body. These incoming electrons neutralize those positively charged free radicals instantly, literally quenching the oxidative fire without the need for ingested antioxidants to be synthesized and delivered all the way through your digestive tract.
That is wild. The source cites literature from the Journal of Environmental Public Health mapping this exact phenomenon, too. They observe acute drops in inflammatory markers, improved sleep architecture, and a normalization of the diurnal cortisol rhythm just from grounding.
Because it's a measurable physiological change.
The evolutionary mismatch here is what's really staggering to me. For millions of years, hominids walked barefoot or wore highly conductive leather footwear. We slept directly on the ground. We were in a constant state of electrical equilibrium with the earth.
And then, in the span of roughly a century, we paved our environments with asphalt. We moved into elevated insulated structures, and we put synthetic non-conductive rubber on the bottom of all our shoes.
We have literally biologically unplugged the organism from the exact electron reservoir it evolved to utilize for inflammatory control.
We insulated ourselves from our own anti-inflammatory resource.
So taking off your shoes for 10 minutes isn't some mystical woo-woo practice. It is literally plugging the biological machine back into the wall outlet.
Exactly.
Okay, so grounding lowers oxidative stress and neutralizes inflammation. It puts the body in a state of calm repair. But biological optimization isn't just about recovering, right? It is about forcing adaptation. We need to build systemic capacity, and to do that, we have to intentionally subject the organism to a controlled threat.
Right. We pivot now from the reduction of stress to the deliberate application of it. This introduces the protocol of cold exposure.
The dreaded cold plunge.
Yes. We are looking at 30 seconds to 3 minutes of cold immersion. And the text notes this can be executed totally for free by utilizing the coldest setting at the end of a daily shower, or utilizing a standard bathtub filled with cold water and some frozen household Tupperware blocks to drop the ambient temperature.
The biological law governing this is hormesis. Hormetic stress is this phenomenon where exposing a biological system to a low, acute dose of a stressor that would be toxic or even lethal at a prolonged high dose, it provokes an adaptive response that actually makes the organism more resilient.
It's the exact same mechanism as resistance training in the gym.
Right. You tear the muscle fiber by lifting something heavy, and the body overcompensates by building it back denser and stronger.
Exactly. When you plunge the human body into freezing water, you're intentionally triggering a massive sympathetic survival response. The brain perceives an immediate threat to its core temperature, and it initiates a cascade of neurochemical and hormonal survival mechanisms.
I always compare hormetic stress to a forced software update for your nervous system.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right, because when a computer forces a core update, it's highly disruptive. The screen goes black, the cooling fans spin at maximum velocity, the operating system is completely locked down. It is an incredibly uncomfortable process. But once the system reboots, the code is optimized, it processes data faster, and the firewall is way more robust.
That's exactly what's happening. Subjecting your brain to cold water is essentially forcing the nervous system to reboot its stress response parameters.
And the data on what happens during that reboot is just remarkable.
It really is. The cold shock triggers this massive release of norepinephrine, causing systemic vasoconstriction to push all your blood to the core organs to keep them warm. But the most profound neurological impact is actually the dopamine response.
Let's talk about the dopamine, because this is huge.
Right. Cold immersion can trigger a sustained release of dopamine that elevates your baseline levels by up to 250%.
250%. To put that in perspective for you listening, a 250% spike in dopamine is roughly on par with the neurochemical release triggered by certain illicit narcotics.
Yes, it is that powerful.
But the distinction is crucial here. Narcotics dump all the dopamine vesicles at once, leading to this massive artificial spike, followed by a severe depressive crash.
Right, the hangover effect. But precisely the opposite happens with cold exposure. The dopamine release is prolonged and sustained. It slowly elevates and remains elevated for hours after the stimulus is removed.
So it creates this elongated window of heightened focus, mood elevation, and goal-directed behavior without the subsequent neurological deficit. And you just feel incredible for hours.
You do. But beyond the neurochemistry, there is a fascinating metabolic adaptation as well.
Right, let's dive into the fat-burning aspect.
The source text highlights some incredible research published in Cell Reports Medicine focusing on brown adipose tissue, or BAT. And I think the concept of brown fat challenges everything people naturally assume about body fat.
Most adults only think of white adipose tissue, right? Which is the fat that stores excess caloric energy around our waist or hips. It is essentially inert storage, just dead weight.
But brown adipose tissue is entirely different.
Mhm.
It is highly concentrated with mitochondria, which actually contain iron, giving the tissue its brown color.
Hence the name.
Right. And its primary physiological function is not to store energy at all. It's to burn it to generate heat.
This process is called non-shivering thermogenesis, right?
Non-shivering thermogenesis.
Okay, so how exactly does the cold exposure signal this brown fat to turn into a furnace? What is the actual cellular mechanism happening there?
When the cold receptors in your skin detect that sudden temperature drop, they signal the brain to release norepinephrine. That norepinephrine then binds to specific receptors on the surface of the brown fat cells.
Okay, following.
This binding activates a very specific protein inside the mitochondria called uncoupling protein 1, or UCP1.
Uncoupling the mitochondria.
Yes, because normally, mitochondria use the energy from the food we eat to create ATP, the cellular energy currency. But UCP1 essentially short-circuits that entire process. It takes the energy from glucose and lipids, and instead of making ATP, it dissipates that energy entirely as heat.
So cold exposure actively recruits and activates this brown adipose tissue, dramatically increasing your resting metabolic rate.
Dramatically.
Furthermore, because brown fat pulls glucose directly out of the bloodstream to fuel this thermogenic furnace, cold exposure significantly improves your systemic insulin sensitivity.
You are literally building a metabolic furnace inside your body that burns glucose just to keep you warm.
But executing this requires immense psychological friction, let's be honest.
Oh, getting into cold water is awful.
It is. The source material offers some critical advice for the actual application of this in your morning routine. You have to actively override the panic reflex. When the cold water hits you, the absolute natural instinct is to gasp, tense your shoulders up around your ears, and hold your breath.
And if you do that, you're just reinforcing a panic response in the brain. You aren't getting the psychological benefit.
Right. The psychological value of cold exposure lies in top-down control. You must use the conscious breath work we discussed earlier, those slow exhales, to slow your respiration while you are under acute physiological duress.
You're teaching your brain to maintain executive function and calm in a highly stressful environment. You have to relax into the cold.
So we've set the circadian clock with photons. We've downregulated the nervous system with diaphragmatic breath. We've neutralized oxidative stress through electrical grounding. And we've built metabolic resilience through the hormetic stress of cold water.
That's a lot of physiology manipulated already.
It is, but when you step out of that cold water, your vascular system is highly constricted. Your muscles may be shivering. You have mobilized metabolic waste into the tissues. We have to clear the plumbing.
Which logically moves us to the final protocol, moving the static system.
Yes. The intervention here is just a gentle 10 to 15-minute walk, but specifically timed in the postprandial window, meaning immediately following a meal, typically lunch or dinner.
So what does this all mean? The force refers to the lymphatic system as a static system. Let's define the anatomical mechanics of that because it's crucial.
Yeah, let's break that down.
The human body basically has two primary circulatory networks. You have the cardiovascular system, which circulates blood, delivering oxygen and nutrients. This system has a massive centralized engine, the heart pumping continuously.
Right. Even when you are completely paralyzed in deep sleep, your heart is forcefully moving that blood around.
Exactly. But the lymphatic system, on the other hand, which is responsible for managing immune responses and clearing cellular waste, metabolic byproducts, and toxins from the tissues.
That system does not have a centralized pump.
None whatsoever. It is a one-way static network of vessels. The only way lymphatic fluid lymph moves upwards against gravity to be filtered by the lymph nodes and eventually dumped back into the bloodstream is through the mechanical contraction of skeletal muscles.
The muscles literally squeeze the lymphatic vessels to push the fluid.
Exactly. The vessels have these little one-way valves inside them. When your calf muscles and thigh muscles contract as you walk, they compress the lymphatic vessels, pushing the fluid upward. When muscle relaxes, the valves snap shut, so the fluid doesn't just fall back down into your ankles.
Which is why if you sit on an airplane for 12 hours, your feet swell up.
Exactly. If you sit at a desk for 9 hours a day, your primary cellular waste disposal mechanism is almost entirely stagnant.
So walking is literally the biological pump for the lymphatic system. But the source specifically emphasizes walking after meals, post-meal walking. This shifts the focus from just waste clearance to blood sugar regulation, which is arguably the most critical metric for long-term health span.
Absolutely. Postprandial glycemia, the spike in blood sugar after eating, is a massive driver of metabolic dysfunction. When you consume a meal, particularly one containing any carbohydrates, the food is broken down into glucose, which then floods the bloodstream.
And chronically high levels of blood glucose are extremely toxic to the vascular endothelium, the lining of your blood vessels.
Nearly toxic.
The sugar literally binds to proteins in the blood, creating advanced glycation end products, or AGs. And these AGs physically stiffen your arteries over time.
Right. And to prevent that toxicity, your pancreas secretes insulin. Insulin acts as a key to unlock the cells, allowing them to pull the glucose out of the blood and store it.
But there is a secondary, highly efficient mechanism for glucose disposal that doesn't require insulin at all, and this is like the biohacker's secret weapon.
It really is. When you engage in mild, steady-state exercise, like a brisk walk immediately after a meal, the muscular contraction demands immediate energy, so the muscle cells initiate a process called GLUT4 translocation.
Okay, GLUT4 translocation, what is that?
Basically, the GLUT4 receptors inside the muscle physically move to the surface of the muscle cell and begin absorbing glucose directly from the bloodstream to use as immediate fuel. And this process is entirely independent of the insulin pathway.
The muscles act like a massive sink, just draining the glucose out of the blood. The source highlights data from diabetes care demonstrating that a simple 15-minute walk post-meal drastically flattens the glycemic curve.
You prevent the massive insulin spike, which subsequently prevents the massive hypoglycemic crash. You know, that lethargic, brain-fogged state most people experience at 2 o'clock in the afternoon after a big lunch.
The food coma.
Exactly. It prevents the food coma. And it's gentle enough that it doesn't trigger a sympathetic stress response, which would inhibit digestion.
Yeah.
But it is mechanically demanding enough to facilitate that glucose disposal and lymphatic drainage. It perfectly balances the systemic equation.
It is so elegant in its simplicity. Just walk after you eat. Okay, so now we have mapped out 5 distinct physiological levers: sunlight, breathwork, grounding, cold exposure, and postprandial walking.
That's our toolkit.
But if you are analyzing this through the lens of human psychology, adopting 5 new protocols simultaneously sounds like a recipe for immediate burnout. Cognitive overload is the enemy of adherence.
Yeah, it definitely is. And this raises an important question. How do we actually implement all of this without giving up on day 3? This is where we examine section 6 of the source material, the master stack.
The master stack.
The objective here is to utilize neuroplasticity to our advantage through habit stacking. We do not want 5 disparate chores to remember. We want to architect a seamless environmental interaction that compresses the time investment while maximizing the biological yield.
Okay, let's practically mechanically walk through the sequence the source proposes. It constructs this ultimate integrated 45-minute morning routine that, again, costs $0.
Walk us through it.
So you wake up and immediately step outside, barefoot, onto the grass. You are now simultaneously engaging in electrical grounding while absorbing the specific lux intensity of morning photons. The circadian clock is activated, and oxidative stress is immediately being neutralized by the earth.
Brilliant. And while standing in the grass, you initiate the box breathing protocol. You take manual control of the diaphragm, engaging the vagus nerve to slow the heart rate and clear the residual sleep inertia without spiking systemic anxiety.
Right. And you can even combine this with a slow walk around the yard, activating that skeletal muscle pump to move the stagnant overnight lymphatic fluid.
So in one action, you have stacked 4 interventions: light, grounding breath, and lymphatic movement, all compressed into a single 10 to 15-minute outdoor window.
Then you move inside, you take your normal morning shower, but you execute the final 90 seconds under pure cold water, forcing the hormetic vascular constriction, spiking the dopamine, and activating the brown adipose tissue. It's incredible. In under 45 minutes, before you have consumed a single calorie or looked at a single stressful email, you have actively manipulated your neurochemistry, your endocrine balance, your autonomic nervous system, your oxidative state, and your metabolic thermogenesis.
It is an unparalleled biological return on investment.
It really is.
But the reality of behavioral psychology requires a concession here. The source text emphasizes a critical golden rule: consistency beats intensity.
Always.
You cannot force an organism to adapt to massive lifestyle changes overnight without triggering behavioral rejection.
Right. Attempting the full master stack on day 1 is often counterproductive for most people. The protocol succeeds through gradual environmental reintroduction. Your brain establishes new neural pathways through repeated low-friction actions.
So if the entire stack feels overwhelming, the text advises isolating a single variable. Just start with one. Commit solely to the 10 minutes of sunlight.
Just go outside. Exactly. Once that neural pathway is established as a baseline habit, once it feels weird not to do it, then introduce the cold water at the end of your shower.
You layer the protocols over time. You are meticulously rebuilding the habitat your biology expects, piece by piece.
Exactly. And when we look at this entire $0 framework, it really forces a profound philosophical reevaluation of what it actually means to be healthy in the modern era. Let's recap for a second. We discussed lighting the biological switch with morning photons. We discussed grabbing the manual override of the vagus nerve through respiration.
We analyzed plugging the body's electrical potential back into the Earth's reservoir to neutralize those free radicals.
We examined building mitochondrial resilience through the acute shock of cold water. And finally, we mapped the mechanical clearance of the lymphatic system and the insulin-independent disposal of glucose through post-meal walking.
And each of these protocols relies entirely on an intricate, evolved biological mechanism that has existed within the human genome for millennia. The machinery itself is perfect.
Right.
The failure point is the environment we have constructed around the machine.
And the source text leaves us with a statement that essentially serves as the thesis for this entire deep dive. It says, your body already knows how to heal, knows how to adapt and thrive. You just have to give it the right inputs.
It really forces us to stop viewing the human body as this flawed, fragile system that constantly requires external synthetic correction. The organism isn't broken. It is simply starved of its native signals.
And that reality leaves me with a final thought for you to consider as we wrap this up. If the physical architecture of our bodies is so exquisitely designed to extract such profound performance, longevity, and emotional stability from completely natural, completely free inputs, the raw dirt, the unfiltered light of a star, the temperature of frozen water, and the simple mechanical act of moving our own limbs, what does it truly say about the highly artificial, temperature-regulated, synthetic indoor environments we have engineered for ourselves?
It's a sobering thought.
It is. We have spent the last century building a world perfectly designed to insulate us from nature, only to realize that that very insulation is the source of our systemic dysfunction. We now have to consciously, methodically hack our way back to our own biological baseline.
So when you step outside barefoot tomorrow morning and look at the sky, consider this. Are you actually engaging in advanced biohacking? Or are you just finally taking the gorilla out of the box and returning home?
We aren't hacking the system. We are simply providing the system with the exact code it was always meant to run.
Perfectly said.
Stop buying complexity. Step outside, feel the earth, manipulate your breath, and let your biological machine do exactly what it was engineered to do. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you on the next one.